Okay, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so great. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, we're gonna just understand the single sign-on, basically the concepts around single sign-on, and the solutions for which we can implement using Salesforce. So I will encourage everyone to keep their questions for the last, so that we can finish up most of the demos during this session. Uh, so first thing I want to just explain before I mean go to technicalities. I'm not a identity expert. I'm not a security expert. This is just based off my experience, my knowledge, how I implemented in various orgs. So I just try to put together all those things. Um, so that's just a disclaimer. Um, so today's agenda is basically go through the concepts. I would say single sign-on instead of single sign-on. I would say identity management concepts mainly. It has a lot of things like how the uh, authentication, authorization, and the rest of the things works. Why we need a single sign-on solution. Why this is very important. And so there are variety. I mean, there are very common flows. If you implement SSO, I mean, I'll just make a acronym SSO, single sign-on. So if you implement SSO with any um, organized, you might have seen SAML is pretty much used in most of the implementation. So SAML is basically one of the protocol, and then there are various flows with that. IDP initiated, SP initiated. You might have heard about OAuth, and OAuth has its own variety of flows. And again, for the Salesforce, there are, other than this, there are a variety of ways to do integration. I mean, the SSO with like a Facebook or Google or any other different provider. So that's all we're gonna talk, and I'm sure I can show you demo on IDP initiated SAML and SP initiated. If time permits, we'll do OAuth. So that's 3 demos I'm gonna do from the scratch, how we set up and how it works. So so identity management concept starts with like a who are you are. I mean, basically your authentication. So wherever you go to system and you put your credentials, so the first thing you do is like get access to the system by using your credentials. So that's the called authentication, and basically who you are. I mean, that's your identity, right? Just getting into the system. So if you look at the uh, examples here. So if you go to the system, first thing you'll do is like a login with your username password, and that's basically authentication process allows you to access the system. That's the one part of identity management. If you look the variety ways, right? So username password, some of the authentication has like two-factor authentication. Somewhere like certificates are used to do those kind of additional checks. So this is like an enterprise world if you're dealing with the systems. But in general, you go to any DMV office or anywhere, like you go and people ask you some identification, right? So your license is your identity, right? Which has your photo, it's your name. That's pretty much your authentication. Like you can say who are you. So if you showcase that identification, okay, that's valid, and they allows you to access some of the services where required. Like if you go to Dreamforce, basically to and you went to pick up your badge, right? So they will ask for your identification, and that's how you know, okay, this is the correct person and I can hand over that badge. So this is the way authentication work in general terms. And uh, so that's a one of the basic part of the identity management, and everybody deals with those. So most of the organizations, they use like Active Directory and those like exchange passwords and credentials. Every system has their own credentials, so we'll come to that later, why it's required have a single sign-on. But I guess this part, understanding authentication, is important. How we implement that, we're not going to talk that, but so this is the first step of the authentication is part of our identity management. Um, and then next one is like once you access, right, any service or whatever it is, what can you do? So that's the second part, and that's where is your authorization kicks in. So authorization basically, uh, it's simple, like you have access, but you can only access some of the resources. For example, I'm just showing here one picture. So the valley key, right, for any car. So the valley key has specific functions. I mean, it's authorized key, but it has only it can do only just like start a car, lock the doors, and it doesn't allow to open trunk. I mean, all the specific things. Or take another example where you go to uh, hotel where you have reservation. So as you go for registration, first they will authenticate you using your license, and then they will give you a key to your room. So that's your authorization, and you can access only like your room, maybe the cafeteria, maybe the laundry. That's your authorization. And if the store manager, I mean the hotel manager somewhere who has the uh, little bigger role, so they might have key for every room, or they might have access to everywhere, so their authorization is different. But so that's a piece of authorization where you basically have ownership or specific things. So in terms of Salesforce, your profiles and roles, right, so that gives you what you can access and how you can look the your apps or tabs and all the things. So that's basically authorization talking. So so those two things is called basics of identity management. And so there are variety ways to uh, look into how those are implemented, right? So when you talk about authorization, authentication, so there's like a physical layer where a connection is established from which system to which system, and there's a higher layer where basically the firewall, network security level, IP address, where it's going, where it's coming, what protocol is following, how security is like a, I mean, so those are the various things comes into the picture. So that's where we need like a some sort of solution which can make the authorization in secure way, or maybe suitable for that integration or suitable for that use case. So if you look at authorization part, I mean, I'm just jumping here, but authorization, you might have seen OAuth, right? OAuth, you might have seen in a lot of cases you might have heard. So that's basically is authorization piece. And what you do like everyday login, that's the authentication. um, so let's talk about some single sign-on basics. So most of the time, any single sign-on solution or any this authorization or authentication whole process, it's like a dance between two systems or maybe multiple, but it's back and forth, and all happens between like a through some middleware or some client. So mostly the browser is the one of the key middleware you can think about it. And all the flows, I'm going to show some of the flow diagrams later, but most of the flows like go back and forth, like a get and post, and it carries some information from here to there. And that's why I said like a physical layer, you need to understand if you're talking about single sign-on or whatever implementation. So you need to know, okay, we're going to talk from system A to system B, and this is the way, this is the basically secure channel, or this is the IP address, or this is the domain. We're going to follow this protocol. So those are the technicalities you should know a little bit. So and and then when it comes to session, right? So how the session is established. So now we saw authentication, authorization, but once you've done that, how that is persisted into that website or the system, so that they don't have to go out, and basically they keep doing the what they need to do to maintain it, the expiry. So there are a number of ways how it's treated. As I said, browser is the most commonly middleware client. So you can think about like a cookies, the one of the way, the URL rewriting. If you see in Saml SP initiated flow, uh, so it carries some part in URL as a request, and then when response goes, it carries the actual landing page and it goes back and forth. uh, in some scenarios, you can send like a form fields in a post way. So if the way SAML assertion goes, it's like a form, it's like a post, and it carries those fields. um, and how the SSL sessions are basically established and carried. So these are like a various mechanisms are used in general. Um, just to when you begin with single sign-on, you should know how the session basically is tracked, and where I'm going to look for if any issue comes or what is going on. You should know little network basics, right? As I said, physical layer, higher layer. So you should know at least if there's issue, you've done everything and your flow is not working for some reason. So maybe firewall is blocking that port or that URL or the domain. So you should know high level physical layer and high level the network diagram. You should put some understanding on the systems. As I said, browser is the main broker, which is you can pretty much use so many tools nowadays in like a Chrome developer option. There are like a variety of ways you can see what's going on, where things are going wrong, or you just want to follow how it works. You can pretty much see yourself. And the protocols, I said, the protocols are like a so what protocol you use for single sign-on? So SAML is like a security assertion markup language. It's kind of XML based protocol. It's a very common standard, and so it has a versions. 2.0 is the latest, and it's like an industry-wide standard, and everybody follows that. So meaning, if I'm building some SaaS application and I'm selling it to market, so I should have implemented the way any third party can easily integrate with me for SSO. So I will implement SAML way. So the main IDP who's going to use it, so they know how to do the handshake, how to do implementation. It's pretty common. uh, so SAML is the one. So the federation, uh, so that's another one. So it can be used in like all cases like a SAML protocol, but mostly it is used when there are different service providers. So it's it's basically different way of doing the authentication, but it internally again uses the SAML kind of structure. So OAuth is kind of you can say is a authorization, not an authentication. But you might have seen that in your day-to-day examples. Like if you go to Workbench, right? Workbench, as first time you go to Workbench and log in with your Salesforce credentials, you see a screen saying allow access to that app. Or you're on Facebook and you're trying to open some third-party app and it says allow, or LinkedIn. So that basically is doing OAuth mechanism behind, and you are agreeing with that, and then it allowing to authorize that app to some data. So this is a very secure way of implementing um, authorization between third parties without passing the credentials. So the main goal of this, all these flows and everything, is where we don't have to share the password across the network channels. So it works differently. Somewhere SAML works with a SAML assertion token, which is kind of a very secure, and even if you get it, you cannot use it. Um, the OAuth has like a access token, which is again generated on the fly, back and forth dance between two providers, and so we'll see that. So all these protocols are basically very secure, and the main basically things is like uh, you don't share your password across the network. OpenID is the authentication mechanism. So when you say OAuth, right, OAuth works with OpenID mostly if you want to do authentication based on like a specific OpenID protocol. I yeah, there are trained on some third-party apps. They use OpenID. Kerberos is like it's very common in Windows world. So so these are the very common protocols, and we're gonna mostly talk on SAML and little bit on OAuth. So before we jump into actual scenarios, so I want to just give some definition so you uh, follow those along. So SAML, as I said, security assertion markup language, which is pretty much we're gonna use it in our most of these SSO solutions. OAuth is like a open standard for authorization. It's mainly for authorization. Federation is again another way of doing SAML, but it's like a authenticate a different system than one you're trying. I mean, you can have some different identifier, and if you have multiple systems with a different identifier, so you allow those through those kind of federation way. Instead of like everyone follow that username password terminology, so it's a little different. It's a big topic its own. So IDP, I mentioned this before, but IDP is like your identity provider. So it's a main system which creates, maintains, and manages all your user information, mainly the identity information, and which provides authentication. So, for example, for my company, we have identity provider, which is our Okta, but Okta is provisioned using the Active Directory. So all the users, like all the Windows users, are part of Active Directory, and where if someone joins company, they create a record, they create a password which get expired every 90 days, and then Okta is basically is our identity provider, which is like a third party sophisticated way of managing all the single sign-on, the variety of integrations and syncing and all those things. So, so identity provider is a system where you can will be always authenticating you against your credentials first time, and once its credentials are passed, then it will generate a token to any third party system. So if I'm doing a single sign-on, so if I go to my Salesforce, it will take me to the my IDP, which is identity provider, which is uh, Okta. And as I log into Okta, so it's basically I'm logging with my Active Directory credentials, and then I'm good. So as long as I'm providing correct information, my authentication is done. Now from that onwards, all those single sign-on or any other requests are going out of that system. Those are done through a SAML way or different way, which is like not passing the credentials, it's passing the tokens, so that it makes handshake with other systems and gets into that system. So identity provider is a key system, and there are a variety of identity providers in market, like a Ping Identity, Okta. Those are pretty common. And service provider is basically who is dependent on the IDP. So for example, Okta is a one example here in my scenario. Um, and so Salesforce is a service provider in this case. So they are relying on the identity provider to approve that authorization. So so as we talked about Active Directory, we talked about some of the credential, how the authentication works, how um, other systems work. So So let's talk about what is the main real problem and why do we need this single sign-on solution, um, and how we can make it really sophisticated so that there'll be less security holes, and it's basically easy to maintain for whole enterprise admins, because at the end, uh, credentials are important, and you see incidents here and there most of the time. So that's like a number one top priority to have these things implemented properly. So let's think about the scenario. So Genesis here is, so I have system one and system two and system three, right? So I'm using username password for system one, another system has different username password. So yeah, in three systems I can pretty much remember my password and I can do variety things. So usually that's easy. People do that. But now, okay, my company is saying all the passwords should be synced through, Active Directory. All the systems should use Active Directory credentials. Um, so let's say I'm having SharePoint, I'm having maybe my LMS system, everything. Want to make sure they use my like a Bitbucket. Want to use the same credentials which is coming from my Active Directory. Yeah, that's also pretty much you can do. Most of the internet sites, they pop up the username password where you put your Active Directory credentials and you're good to go. So that's easy way with Active Directory. Now there are systems like a Salesforce, which is in like a SaaS cloud apps, like a Workday or Salesforce, or maybe um, um, maybe the Chronos and all those like HR apps. So there's variety of things, right? They are on cloud, and you need to go to their service to log in, and then probably that's getting complicated. So now, in order to log in with those systems with Active Directory, so there's a problem. You can make that happen, but you don't want to store those passwords and credentials, which is Active Directory specific, into their cloud, right? The only way you can do is you basically have those same credentials somewhere stored in Salesforce so that you can make that happen. Um, and then it's again, if someone is leaving and all those things, it's very difficult to maintain. So all the time you see here, um, all the time you see here, problem here is mainly yeah, problem here is like there's no trust, like as and when the credentials are passed across or copied somewhere another system, or like duplicated or referred in like a so that's not a good way. So this whatever solution, temporary solution, will not work in real scenario. And if you really want to use your Active Directory credentials, and you want to make sure user doesn't have to remember all the passwords on a different system, they just know their Windows credential, that's it. Then you have to have like a kind of different architecture which is works in different way. So here's the uh, uh, single sign-on architecture based on IDP and SPR scenario. So you can see this green one is a IDP, which is holding all my credential information, which is synced with my Active Directory. And then, so all user has to do is like a go here, log in. Once it's login, it will go back to any service related Salesforce. And then in order to authenticate this, so the service provider and IDP, they talk to each other and basically get the token and then say it's good. It's like a I know Naresh and Naresh knows Nagesh. So as long as Naresh says okay, I trust Nagesh. So I mean it's like a chain. So I trust Nagesh, and that's how it works. So it's the same way. So as long as you can pass this credential. So identity provider, okay, I know this user, and it goes here and he asks for authorization further things. So yeah, I know it passes the trust, and it say okay, you're good to go. So it's a pretty simple way, but this trust, whatever we are talking here, it is claim based. It is very secure. It's like a Saml token. Even if you get it, you cannot do anything, and that's why it's important to have implemented in right way. And that's why the single sign-on is first place important. I mean, the use case is required. So as I said, common IDPs are Okta. It's pretty popular. It's a sophisticated way to do so many things. Ping identity, the CA, ADFS I use in past. So those are like few common, and you might have seen one other. And you can build your own. Like in my past company, I built my own IDP, which is like in .NET. I built whole authentication process, authorization process, generating the SAML XML and sending it out, and uh, basically checking that. So so there are variety ways to do that. Okay. So let's start with some of the flows. So far, I guess everybody got the idea what we're talking, how the concepts work, and what are the different providers are played in the picture. So IDP initiative SAML flow, meaning we're going to talk about IDP, and then I'm going to demo, and then come back to SP, and then probably we'll demo that. So IDP is basically we're going to have some tool called Axiom. So this is developed by Salesforce Labs for testing single sign-on or auth flows, kind of those things. So they have like a available online. You can fork it on GitHub also. So so it's pretty simple. IDP initiated, meaning all the time request is initiated from IDP. So for example, you always go to Okta or any your IDP, first log in there, and then you will see bunch of buttons there to access your Salesforce or Workday. So that's IDP initiated. You always go to your IDP website, and then from there you initiate your request and you get authenticated. So the way it happens, right? So very first you set up these two IDP and SP using the SAML way. So you need to set those, configure those using some of the identification information from here, putting here, and some of the information from here into here. And the one of the key item here is like a X509 certificate. So that's basically a mechanism to for IDP to know this request is coming from uh, Salesforce instance, which I know. So basically, during this configuration, you need to generate one certificate from IDP, which carries some public key, and that install that on service provider, and the IDP knows the private key. So whenever it's a request coming from this service, so they know it's coming from known source, which is based off their generated private key, sorry, public key. So that's the one, the first step where we do the configuration using the attributes and the certificate. And then so user basically going here on the IDP, then in step 2, um, and then basically entering the credentials, and then like step 4, it's authenticated, and the token is coming back here, and then it basically does a SAML assertion to the Salesforce, which allows you to access the system. So it's straightforward. I mean, it's just like a one-way flow. And in this flow, we can also implement just-in-time provisioning. We'll see that. So let me show you some of the things how we can set up this IDP initiated flow, and then the next step is like basically how we can debug into Salesforce if something error comes up, how we can enable the just-in-time provision. So just-in-time provision is the mechanism where whenever this request is coming, right, this number 5, which is a SAML assertion provided to Salesforce. So this SAML assertion carries some attributes which Salesforce SP will be using it and establishing their own session. But let's say I want to make sure whenever my last name is changed into Active Directory, I want to make sure pass that along, and same last name should be updated into Salesforce. So that's the mechanism, like a just-in-time provision where you enable that. And so whenever this request coming for authentication, um, so it passes that information and it updates the last name in this service provider. So that's JIT provision. And there are some tools in Salesforce itself where you can debug and change your understand what is going on with the SAML if there's an error. Okay, so so let's jump into our next demo. I'll just take a pause if anyone want to talk anything, any questions so far. So let me know. Otherwise, we'll come back to this slide later. Okay, so let's see which gram. So you guys seeing Chrome tab with Okta, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we'll go to Axiom first. I mean, this is the tool I was talking. So this tool has like a variety ways you can understand single sign-on. You can test in your dev org and see how it goes. It shows all the details, how the SAML is generated, how the OAuth token is generated, all the things. So it's pretty handy tool. You can fork it on GitHub. So if you go here like a SAML provider, so it shows a few things like the configuration part where you need to download this IDP certificate, which I was talking, X509 certificate. So this is from Axiom. And if I want to set up my dev org, freshly created dev org with a single sign-on, so first thing I will do is basically I will download the certificate. So and the certificate is basically binary certificate. It will just carry a public key, and this is coming from IDP, and this is like my kind of handshake between two systems, so then they can trust each other. So that's the first step, and then so we're gonna go here as a generate SAML response. So you'll see versions here. I'll choose number version 2.0, and then you'll see a bunch of information here. So pretty much you can see this in any IDP. So if you go to Okta, it's like basically presented in a little sophisticated way, but and you might not see in that IDP area, IDP part many times, because if you're on Salesforce mostly, if you're configuring on Salesforce, you just get a metadata file from your IT team, and then you just use it for configuring single sign-on. But in real, so you need to understand and like how the certificates are coming from IDP and what parts are going here and all. So this is the tool we're going to use to do a single sign-on with my org. Um, so again, so let me open another tab, maybe. Hmm. Okay, let me reshare. I think it's only sharing one tab. So window. Okay. So you're seeing multiple times. Let me switch. So yeah, that's good. So I log into my Salesforce org. So this is my freshly created dev org, and this dev org basically doesn't have any authentication single sign-on setup. So I'll go to setup here, and I'll just try single sign-on. So all I need to do is basically, there are more folks are joining. I'll just allow them to add. So here, first thing I need to do is enable this SAML, enable single sign-on using SAML. So that's the number one step. So I don't have anything here. I'll just enable this. So this is a step one, and now you can add like settings using variety ways. Like you can type in here. You can pretty much, like as I said, your IT might be providing some metadata file. You can upload. It will configure that way, or you can fetch it from the IDP. So let's do manually here. So I'm gonna just name this like a axiom, and then the issuer is basically it has to match what goes into your IDP. So I'm gonna again say axiom here, and entity ID something we will get from the IDP. So here's the way, here's the place where you need to upload your certificate, which is my public certificate I got from IDP, right? So I just upload here, um, and then so I'll just keep everything uh, default. So down here you can see some of the bunch of options, like identity type, like assertion contains username from the Salesforce user. So the one of the key thing is, how do you identify the user? Like token, yeah, you got the token from IDP SAML token and everything's good, but when they send this token, it has to know which user to pull up, which user to give authentication. So there has to be some key, right? So that's the options are here, like a username, federation ID. We'll talk about that federation ID, but let's go with this simple basic one. And I guess, so we need an identity provider login URL, and we need this one. So I'll go back here, and I will use this entity ID from this system, and I'll just copy here. And let's set up this. So uh, so issuer, right? So the issuer has to match between two systems. So I put axiom there, so I'll put axiom here as well. And the recipient URL. So whenever this guy IDP says, okay, I know this guy and I can trust him, then it needs to way to redirect back to the service provider, and that's where we need to get this recipient URL from the Salesforce side. So so once we generate this, um, we'll get the URL. So let me just copy this start URL. Okay, so I'll just save this. Okay, so once I save this, you can see it created some login URL. So I can copy this and I can put it here, recipient URL, right? So I guess I have pretty much configured everything from both sides. So you can see in our diagram, right? Okay, I should have pulled into browser, but I'll pull the diagram later. But um, so the number one step is basically handshake between these two configuration. And the main thing is the certificate. So you can see the certificate coming from Axiom. It has some public key, and it is valid certificate. So whenever it generates some token, SAML token, so it knows this is a valid one. And we said the username is our key to match the user. So now when we request this response, we need to send the username, and my username is, I guess, copy. Yeah, this is my username for my dev org. So we're not sending any passwords here. We're just saying, okay, identify the user with this username and establish a session whenever the SAML token is generated. So that's pretty much is required on like a IDP initiated. So my axiom is IDP, and if I say request SAML response, so let me log out from here, then probably it should work. Okay, so I don't have any valid session here. So if I say, so you can see parts up here, right? Um, so this is the request generated. I mean, the response for SAML response. And let me a little bigger here. So it's like XML based SAML, which is pretty much, there are variety things here, but key thing is this one, X509 data. So this is the certificate data, which knows it should be valid with the same provider certificate. And down here, it will carrying some name ID. So name ID should be my username somewhere here. Yeah, name ID you can see. So this is the, so these are the two key information it's sending as part of SAML. But again, when this response goes as a post through the website, again it's a um, encoded, like it applies like base 64 encoded. So you will see just this text. You will not see this SAML response in real unless you use some add-in to decode it and review it. So let's try login and see whether it works. Yeah, it worked. So you can see I'm logged into my system. Um, this is my, yeah, this is my dev org, and we go to single sign-on. Um, so you can see we're using this. So that's the IDP initiated. So this is my IDP axiom, and which basically took me directly to the uh, system without asking any credentials like my username password for the Salesforce. Okay, so next thing we'll look into this is, as I mentioned before, which was my screen. Okay, so I'll make sure just keep into two different tabs. So, uh, so we'll go back here. I just don't want to lose all the configuration. And now I want to show how the just-in-time provision works. So just-in-time provision basically, here the attributes you can put. Where the G that side. Yeah, so for example, I can put like a username like this, and or maybe the last name. So let's change my last name, and before that I will show you my last name on that. So I'll put a last name here like a demo. And if I go back here, so if you go back here, users, so this is my user and last name is here, Sonawane. So let's say, let me log out again. And let's generate again. So pretty much same thing. And we'll request SAML response again. So it added my additional attribute as part of this. You can see this is added here. Um, and when it basically is doing authentication, like it's doing single sign-on, allowing you to authorize that service provider, but along with the same thing, it's doing a just-in-time provision because it's just syncing my some of the attributes which I can sync with my IDP. So okay, so it logged in, and if I just refresh this one, so it should change my username to SSO demo. Um, so yeah, unless I put the correct attribute name. So that's the idea here, basically, to doing just-in-time provision. Uh, but the Okta and tool, they have like a really sophisticated way doing the integration and doing all those things. So one thing doesn't happen, this just-in-time provision is like deauthorization, meaning uh, basically deactivating those users if you want, like offboarding process, which doesn't happen, and that's why we need a proper identity management tool like Okta or something which can do that through some API calls, and it can during offboarding you can also deactivate some user from some systems. As soon as you deactivate an Active Directory, you can deactivate into Salesforce or any of your HR systems. Okay, so let me go back here. I'll take this out. So now we saw with the username. So what is this federated ID? So federated ID is basically, I don't want to use my email like a username for log authentication and during this authorization of SAML token, right? I can use something else like my employee ID, and let's say my employee ID like 12345, and then how do I change my SAML setting so that it works with this flow, right? So this is pretty common. A lot of companies use instead of email. So the one way is, I'll go back here again in my org. I'll go to my single sign-on. Okay, the first thing you need to do is here is there's a one federation ID. Yeah, there's one external field here. So this field is standard field on the user object. It allows you to use like a federated ID, like employee ID or phone number, whatever. It's the way of mechanism identifying this user. So I'll put the same 12345. I'll save this record. Um, so after this, the next thing is, let me try what happens. Let's see what happens if we do this way. So let me log out. Okay, and then generate Saml response. Okay, so there's some error occurred. Yeah, I was hoping for this screen. Um, so now I just want to show how can you debug this and fix it. So you can see the error scenario also, and I can see the federation way. So let me go backdoor way. I will log in using my credentials here. I cannot log in through single sign-on, so I'll use my credentials to log in, and I'll go back to my single sign-on setting. So right here, you can see there's a SAML assertion validator on top here. So I'll click on this, and it will show you the failure, what happened, right? So it okay. It got this the SAML token from this provider, and it went through so many steps like validating expiry and everything, but it failed for unable to map the subject to user. So we said find out the user based on 12345, and it is trying username using the email. So that's the wrong here, and you can see this error pretty much clearly. But yeah, one thing I forgot here is I didn't change my SAML settings to use a new mechanism instead of username. So I think we need to update here, go back here and switch this radio button from username to Federation ID and just save it, and probably it will work. So let me log out. Okay, let's go back. Yeah, I have to go all the way back. So another thing is, let's say I have this already generated SAML response, right? I mean, this is generated from my last request. If I send this again, it will not work because every SAML token will have expiry, which is very short. So if someone gets hold of this, SAML token and try to it will not work after certain milliseconds or maybe seconds. It depends on how you configured it. Another thing here is important is the clock between two systems, IDP and SP, has to match, meaning your time zones or clock, it should be matched so that it knows it is generated from origin this time and it's going to expire this time. So otherwise you'll always end up having the expiry error. Like if your org is in defined into some Europe zone and your IDP is in like Pacific time, then there will be always lag and it will say your token is expired already. So that's important thing. So let's go back here, and I kept this 1 2 3 4 5 same thing and generate new SAML response and log in. Yeah, it worked. So so this is the another way of doing, single sign-on, either using a username or either using the some Federation ID. So let me go back to the. Okay, so this is IDP initiated flow. Let me switch another screen here. Where's my slide? Okay, here comes slide. Okay, so you can see it happened in this way. Like this is the step one, we did a configuration. Um, so step 2 and 3 is basically we already have that axiom and the token basically generated and sent here, and then it authenticated your Salesforce session. So moving on, I mean, I guess we still have half an hour, so we can cover at least this flow, and probably Okta I can just talk through. Um, so SP initiated SAML flow. SP initiated SAML flow is similarly, but we are doing with a IDP where we can, have so that uh, like a um, sufficient way to redirect based on the request. So in this, you can see there are two ways, right? There's a request coming and there's a response going. So there's a SAML request and there's SAML response. In previous scenario, it's only a SAML response. So you're going to Axiom and generating and sending to Salesforce. But here it's different. Like if you are like a, oh, sorry. So if you're on like a, you have some bookmark, or you have some link, which is your deep linking coming through email. So someone said, okay, here's a report, can you open it? And then when you click that report, it's not like a login.salesforce.com, it's like some different link in that your org. So you have that way to go to that link, but it's a secure, and system says, oh, you're not logged in, and it will ask you to log in. And so login scenario can be either it will take to credential standard way, but if you do single sign-on way, it will take you back to the your identity provider. So meaning, this is our configuration. We're going to do the same way, but user is going to Salesforce first, and it says, okay, I don't need you, and you're trying to access some secure resource, and it will come back on the browser, and browser will redirect back to uh, identity provider, sending the SAML request, which will have some of the details. Uh, so once identity provider knows, okay, this guy is trying to access, and I know this guy based on authentication which he did into Okta, and that's basically 5 and 6, where it will try to authenticate that user in Okta. And once it's valid, it will send a SAML response, and then it will go back to Salesforce and it will establish session. So the request is initiated from service provider instead of the IDP. That's why it's called SP initiated. But so in these scenarios, it's like all deep linking and here in variety ways. So this is very common scenario where most of the companies go for it. So I'll try to set up a IDP flow, and then maybe I'll set up this after my next slide. I'll just talk about OAuth, and then I'll try to set up a IDP using Okta, because Okta has like a free trial, uh, which everybody can try, and just to play around how to set up this IDP side and kind of those things. So that's why I use Okta. Um, but let me talk about OAuth a little bit, and then we can go back to the demo. So OAuth is like a authorization part. So we so far talking about mostly the authentication, and the single sign-on part is authentication and the authorization both. Uh, so OAuth is only authorization. So as I mentioned, if you go to Workbench or any site which is requires some access to your org, so it will pop up some screen allow access, and then you basically allow that access. So the way it works is, again, this is a web server OAuth flow, and there are like 6 7 different OAuth flows. Yeah, it depends on how you implement. So OAuth itself is like a big topic. We can have another session to talk about each OAuth flow, how it works, different use cases. But this is very standard, like a simplest general way, which is browser is your broker, and where you're trying to access some resource. So I'll give you another use case here is, let's say I have Salesforce org, and in Salesforce org, I'm using a DocuSign or Adobe Sign as my e-signature tool, right? Now, when I generate a code, right, and the code should be sending my DocuSign document instead of just a plain PDF. And then in those scenarios, I will integrate with the DocuSign. But in order to talk to DocuSign, because you'll be creating a document in DocuSign, you'll be setting the template in DocuSign. Salesforce is just basically accessing that system internally, opening that, and doing everything on DocuSign, but using your session which is in Salesforce. So meaning, uh, so you're asking Salesforce to go to DocuSign in secure way without passing credentials, and using their resources as per your authorization, and implement or basically use those resources, and use uh, as per the given user's credentials. So that meaning, if you have only access to do 10 things, you can do that 10 things, not more than that. uh, so that's the authorization flow which is happening within the Salesforce for any third party app. um, so the way it works is, um, you can see the flow. So first thing is, again, the configuration. The pre-configuration is about knowing each other. So in Salesforce, there's a connected app. You can create a connected app where you can configure um, my third-party app, which is going to talk to me. It will generate some keys which you will be using in other app. So only exchange happens here is not the password, but there's like a client ID and secret ID. So the client ID is basically sent over the browser, and then it receives the response code. So basically you can see in it's pretty much flow. Um, why is changing? So the number two here is um, user attempts to navigate to protected resource. The web browser redirect to OAuth flow, and so the web browser redirects to a Salesforce login screen. So first it will say, okay, uh, log in using your credentials. So that's the number one step. And once you log in, so it asks for third party uh, using some authorization code. So in order to know the third party, whether this is a valid user and whether I can share some token or not, so it will send two things like this authorization code and the client ID coming from the Salesforce. So this number 7 is basically it's sending, okay, um, it's sending client ID and the authorization code. And once it's you send those code here, that's a one-time authorization code. It comes into URL, and even if you get a hold of it, you cannot use it. So that's a safe way instead of sending password. And it once you pass this number 8 stage, so the system will generate the tokens. So there are a number of tokens it generates, like an access token, refresh token. You can see step 9, it generates like a token, access token, and the request refresh token. So access token is basically kind of your token which will be used by your application to access anything. So it's like a calling a web service. If you use a Postman, right, and if you make a call to any REST API to pull some data from Salesforce, so the first thing you do is like you make a OAuth call using your credentials. You get a token, and use that token in your subsequent, uh, data pull calls or whatever calls, and it will give you based on your that session whatever that token you're given. So it's a pretty secure way to making calls. Only you're exchanging is this authorization code, which is a one time. It's generated by system, and the secret key is something you will be passing whenever you make this the final call, which is happens on the server side. Mostly you have to keep it on your systems. So yeah, OAuth is like a very big topic. To demonstrate, we need a I mean um, at least we should know variety ways like um, the web server flow and other flows. And there are some good links on the YouTube, which is coming from last Dreamforce. Yeah, there are some good sessions have happened in Dreamforce, so I can share you those links. But let's go to the our SP initiated flow, and let me try to set up Octave, so at least you see basics of single sign-on and how it can be configured using actual IDP. Okay, so let me switch again screen, go back to window. Okay, so I'm back to my browser. Yeah, before I jump again, there's one last thing I want to show on the OAuth. Yeah, this Axiom tool, right? So Axiom tool has OAuth testing part also, and if let's say I choose a 2.0, so you can see the flow, how it happens. You can pretty much generate some uh, request from here, OAuth request, and fork it to I mean your Salesforce. Basically, create some connected app in Salesforce. Get the consumer key here. It will generate authorization code, and then once you have that, get the secret key and make that request, and it will have the tokens which we are looking for. It will not show all those like flows, what happens, how you access, but it will just show how the tokens are generated, right? Like this request comes with the access token or those variety tokens. Okay, so let me go back to the uh, my Okta instance. Okay, Okay, so asking authentication. So this is my fresh trial arc on Okta. You can see 25 days left. And this is my same arc, which we just configured, the simple sing SSO. Um, so let's go back to the single sign-on. And then here, you can have multiple ways. So most of the companies might have a different single sign-on solution for different, employees or different groups, or depends on regions and all those things. So you can have multiple, you can keep adding, and then you can set up those on your login page, how you want to present it. So let's go back to the IDP. This is my IDP now, and I will go and add app here, add an app. So I search for Salesforce, basic one. This is the basic Salesforce.com. So I mean, these IDPs have so many things inbuilt, so you just have to plug in and then configure. Um, so yeah, you can see pretty much similar stuff here. Um, okay, so now next. Okay, so I will use so this is a secure web authentication, and then I'll use this SAML 2.0, right? So this is the way I want. Um, and good thing here is, like, I don't have to copy issuer or certificate, everything. Yeah, I can just say download this metadata. I'll just download this metadata. Um, first. I'll save this metadata in my downloads as XML. Okay. So the first step is get the metadata, meaning get all those required things from the IDP, and I can simply go here, new from my metadata file. I'll choose this file, and it should create most of the things for me. Like you can see, uh, it added its own name, issuer name, identity, entity ID. You can see the certificates also uploaded, the signature method, everything is there, right? So I'll just change this name to Okta. Um, and then what else I want here? Um, yeah, so probably this next thing I will need, I didn't provide login URL and rest of the things. So let's go back here. So let's save this first, and it generated my login URL. Now, in order to work this configuration with IDP and all, you cannot do this with your default domain like login.salesforce, because login.salesforce is very generic, right? It doesn't know where to go. You need to have your own domain. So I haven't set up my own domain here, so I'll go to my domain, and first I will do that. So let's set up as a, yeah, I'll just say SSO demo. It's available, register for the demo. So it will take a while. Oops. Okay. So hopefully it's taking. Yeah. So let me see whether it went through. Demo. Yeah, it will take some time, right, to get this registered. Um, Yeah, once we have this domain generated, so next step is we have to deploy that, and we'll go back to our single sign-on settings, Okta one. Yeah, it's still showing login. It should change to our own domain. So that's the step one. Um, so meaning once you have this your own domain, now whenever you do single sign-on from either Okta or either mobile app or any others, so as soon as you put your domain, like whatever the your um, this domain, it will recognize the sign on app, I mean ways. If like mainly for the mobile app users, right, you don't know how to do single sign on. So for mobile app users, you need to go to the custom domain, you put your domain, and as soon as you put the domain, it will trigger a single sign on option, can be Okta or can be your IDP, and then you can pretty much use the same mechanism there also. um, so that's a question comes a lot of people, what happens with the low mobile apps and all those things. So let me see whether domain is I don't think it took. Okay, it didn't go through previously, but yeah, this will be my domain. So let's wait for a few minutes. Yeah, it will change, and so we'll put a URL like that, and then it will ask for domain. So this is pretty easy setup. Like you just got a SAML metadata. You need to put the URL here, and then you just create this app, and then put the same way, like how you're gonna map the username, metadata, or sorry, Federation ID or username. So that's we're gonna provide in next step. Let this kick off. Domain. Okay, so log in with the domain. Yeah, it's done. You can see this new domain is coming up. Yeah, we need to log in and then deploy to the users. That's the step we have to do. On. Okay, network issue. Yeah, you can see domain is changed here. So I can copy this login URL. This is specially for this org. So my IDP knows where to reach after token is generated, which instance or whatever it is. So I'll just put this here. Okay. So I will add people here. Assign people. There's only one assign people. Okay, so now I'm adding a user. So let's say you have active directory, right? You allow 100,000 user from your org, and you'll be only assigning bunch of those, maybe only sales team or marketing. So Okta administrator has to add those, that group or specific user. And when you add, like I want to specify my username in Salesforce, because this is not my username in Salesforce. My username in Salesforce is something else. So I will change this to uh, like this. Most of the time, you will have the email address of your org, I mean your company, and the same username will be in Salesforce. Unless that username is not available, it will be different. And in those scenarios, you have to go here and change that so that they don't get any error. Save and go back. Okay, so this is done. So I'll go back to single sign-on settings. Okay, this is good. Um, so you can see the provisioning, like here also they have provisioning, and there are a lot of things which I was talking before. So let's go back here. It's still not working. Let's okay. So switch to my domain, and next thing I guess I have to do is domain. Deploy to the users. Okay. So so this is my domain, and if I go to here, yeah. So let's log out and see how the Okta single sign-on works, whether it works or not. I think I did all the steps, so let's see. If I go here, okay, so I go to my apps. So you can see this is again, we're talking about IDP Flow first. I mean, this works both way, but you can see my app is coming here as Salesforce. And when I click here, it will do that flow, which we're talking in IDP initiated. It will, since I'm already logged in, so Okta knows me, and Okta trusts this Salesforce, so it should basically authenticate to you directly into the Salesforce. Yeah, so this works. um, and now you're logged into Salesforce. So now I want to see like a SP initiated scenario, right? So I'll go to any specific URL. Maybe I'll go to, oops, not console. Accounts. Okay, so I'll just change my all accounts. And this is the URL, right? So kind of I'm coming from email or my bookmark, and it's asking me to, um, um, authentication. So it can go variety ways. So before that, um, let me go back to one more settings here. Okay, so these both are enabled here, right? Okta and Axiom. So probably I will go to login page. Where's the it's my domain only. So here you can say I can ask for login from um, standard form or multiple. So I don't see Okta here. I need to see why Okta is not coming here. So yeah, the last time I guess I forgot one thing. This is good. This is good. Yeah, it should show that this option also in my login. So any idea why it's not coming? Anyone? Okay, let's go back to my domain. Domain. Mm, domain setting.
Probably it's the identity provider URL on your Okta setting because you need that. Uh,
No, it should show option here because I configured 2 single sign-ons. So let me do one thing. I'll just delete one, the old one. I should have only one. Delete this. Delete this one. Oh, sorry, not this one. Axiom. And I go to this one. This is correct. HTTP post. Save.
Do you need to have a certificate for Okta while you set up the SSO here?
Yeah, this is the certificate. It's there.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it's there. I mean, we can log in through Okta, but all I'm saying is I'm not seeing the option in login
Yeah.
flow. We
Is
can
there a
log in through.
is there a matching between the SSO, sorry, the login URL here and in your Okta setup or configuration?
Yeah, probably. So that's what I guess I missed some step, but yeah, it's not coming authentication provider here. So, but usually you'll see all providers here, and when you go to the screen, right? So let me log out completely. So let me log in again here. Mm,
so in your Manoj, what I'm saying, I guess just if you go to the Okta setting, there is a login URL right for IDP. So you should update that because it will use that URL to go to the IDP, right? So right now Okta doesn't know what URL it should go with. I guess I'm just thinking here. So once you
no,
pop
I mean
in the
IDP is fine because IDP might fail for if something is not good. But these settings are on the single sign-on, like single sign-on settings here. So what I mean is like, let me log into my one of my uh, production org. I'll show how it should look. Okay, I just want to show that option how it works, how it looks. Okay, so I'll go to single sign-on here. So this is my production, right? It says strong tie EU, and but uh, if I go to my domain, it's easy. You get option here like a so you can see this, it's showing this strong tie EU, which is the Okta way. So it should get multiple options. If you're multiple, it should get multiple options here. So that's what I was trying to show you. But let's see what happens into the login flow. Um, So the URL which I had copied before, I just paste it here. Yeah, it's login directly.
I'm gonna check one more thing. Maybe that's session management. Do we need to maybe activate that flow?
No, for Axiom we didn't do anything. Axiom did show up there. So let me try one more time. Yeah, it will appear here. It will appear all this where, and if let's say I'm going here, so it always showing me user credentials, but I want to show SP initiative, like I'm trying to access secure URL, and I click on Okta. It will go to Okta, login, and then come back here. That's what I was trying to do. Okay, let me see one more time. Anything missing here? Single sign-on method. Um, yes, we get 5 more minutes. We'll try to debug otherwise. But the flow should work like that. Mhm. Okay, here's a domain. I guess this is missing. My domain. Yeah, that was I was thinking. So let's say this is my domain. Okay, save. Then I log into my. Okay, so let's go back to settings again. Setup. Single sign on. Okay, IDP URL. We don't need it here probably. Put this into here. Okay, probably that's the missing part. And let's go to my domain. Okay, now you can see Okta, right? Yeah, so that login IDP URL was missing, so I'm glad we figured out. So now you can log in through regular form or Okta. So now let's go to the account. So this is account page, right? And I want to go to account page directly. I'll close this tab. I will log out from here. I'll log out from my Okta. Okay, so this is the flow we are looking at, the SP initiated. So I type in my deep link or some embedded link or some link which is coming from email. It will take me to the screen and it shows me either you can disable this or you can use this backdoor, but I'm saying okay, I want to log in through Okta. It took me to my Okta, which is a file version of. So now as long as you're authenticated in Okta, so Okta can trust you and it trusts I mean the request, and it will basically um, so just take a close look at browser. As soon as you log in, it will do its stuff, login, and then it will generate single sign-on. It will basically try to do a single sign-on on the uh, Salesforce. So I guess there's some error, maybe something other things are missed. We can go back and see what happened. Usually you can see it's shifted from Okta. It directly went to your secure site, and it will try to open the same uh, link which you're trying to open from your email or from your bookmark. We can see what happened here. We can check what happened, why it failed. So unable to map the user to the cell, unable to map a Salesforce user. So unable to load config from SSH user. So it's basically, it does it something we are missing with the link between two, probably the username, or it's not good. Let me check again. Gosh. I don't wanted to record and show it. I just wanted to show this on the fly and can real time see what happens. Sometimes you get so many issues. So glad we got a couple issues. We fixed it. Uh, Go to this app. Okay, so here I put my username correctly. That's correct. Sign on. What I'm saying here is, yeah, it's more on how you configure your IDP, right? So I will say custom here, probably. Uh, and this is good. This is good. Um, I'll type it again. So make sure copy it from. Okay, my apps, and let's say I do log out here. Yeah, default should work. Yeah, some other configuration seems to be wrong, so we need more time to debug. So SP initiated flow is simply you click here, go to Salesforce, it will log you in, or you go to any deep link, it will go through Okta, it will log you in and take back to the Salesforce. And there's another part here in this configuration is relay state. So usually you might know what is relay state. So we skip that debug part, but the relay state is basically, if let's say you want to land people, I mean the login as its first experience, land on some specific page, you want to always land user on that. So in this sign on, so you can say the default relay state here, but if I edit this, uh, yeah, you can put some URL. So whenever the everything is done, it will land on that URL. Maybe the link which I copied, I can put it here, that account page or specific page. So you can do that. And this is also dynamic. Sometimes it works the way it is generated. It carries that all the way, and then whenever you go back, it go back to the page you are looking, secure page you are looking. So I guess those are the things. Almost we're top on 2 minutes, but we can spend 5-10 minutes for question answer. If any have any questions, they can talk or you can reach me. Probably, yeah, I can try to answer those best. But yeah, this is something I wanted to show on single sign-on, like an in-depth what goes where, and how we can take advantage of those understanding in better way. Stop
Thank you so
recording.
much, Manoj.